This is a special edition, if you will, of the INN Index, which is a study that INN started in 2017 because there just wasn't very good data about nonprofit news. And that's been the case about diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. There have been snapshots in the past, and there have been many good efforts by RTNDA on the broadcast side, ASNE, now News Leaders Association on the print side, but to capture what was happening with diversity in our field, but they never just really got very far into the nonprofit news world. And so last year, we decided to make a commitment to do a deeper study. This is of INN members, and it captured about half of them at the time, but they are representative of the INN membership as a whole, and we think a pretty good proxy for all of nonprofit news in the US as a whole. So that's what we're going to look at in the next few minutes. A couple of technical points. We did look at gender, and I'll show you one slide on that. We're happy to report that gender parity is dramatically different in nonprofit news. It exists in nonprofit news in a way it doesn't in traditional media. We did not look further into this study into LGBTQA, into veteran status, into other elements of diversity, because we really wanted to focus this first benchmark on this issue of race and ethnic diversity, and that was the issue before us in focusing this study. So going on, I'm going to plunge right into the results, and we're going to run through these very quickly. I will talk about the results from the study. Sarah's going to join me and talk about what are we doing, what can we do about all this, where are we going in the coming year, and we're going to try to save as much time as possible for questions and Q&A. So you can put questions or topics for discussion in the chat as we go. We looked first at the audience, and the audience efforts of nonprofit news around diversity, equity, and inclusion are really pretty broad and strong. 2/3 of the members said, yeah, we are doing this. We are hosting events, we are out in the community, we are really engaging in the community. And the mission of nonprofit news shows here. You can see that that's a kind of core part of what they do. And their engagement tends to be with communities rather than just covering them and writing about them. About half, whether they are targeted publications or general publications, do target audiences such as Black, Hispanic, or have some diversity represented in the audiences they are focused on serving. When we move into staff diversity, and this is what tends to get looked at most, here's a general sense of where things are at. And when you look at total staffing of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, traditional news, we think is around 23%. I actually think it's probably quite a bit lower than that, because those are based on studies that had fairly low participation rates. And we think that the traditional media that didn't participate generally had lower numbers. But for the best comparisons we can find, as imperfect as they are, they're at about 23%. Nonprofit news in staffing, BIPOC staffing is about 30%. And then what we hold ourselves up to and look at is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. What's the overall workforce? And that's about 40%. So nonprofit news is doing better than traditional media and better than philanthropy in general, but lags the total workforce, doesn't yet reflect it. It is fair to say. So what are people doing to build a diverse staff? About 40% have all kinds of broad range of activities. 60% do have staff diversity goals, usually tied to comparing to the community they serve. 80% are making specific efforts to recruit. So there's strong efforts on recruitment, but I'm going to call your attention on that graphic to the right to the bottom of it: retention, promotion, and having written plans. This is where we feel more can be done, or that how do we move the needle and what do we need to do? This top bullet to me really, this really sets a gap that we need to address. Only 25% of nonprofit news leaders said their staff reflects the community they serve. We also were concerned about a third report they're doing little or nothing on DEI. Almost all have goals, but they don't have action plans, even those with very strong intent on how do we carry that out. And then retention and promotion, I called your attention to. The sample size on that is really small, so we can't say for sure what's going on, but it seems to indicate that there's a lot more turnover among people of color than there are among white staffers. And our gut tells us that's true, and that it's something we really need to look at and put more attention in to address this, particularly because we really focus on the leadership of organizations, and several speakers this morning have talked about how important that is in changing the whole picture. There are other factors that aren't necessarily as controllable. Nonprofit news organizations are small. Their average staff size is 6 or 7, and they have low turnover. It was only about 60% of organizations had any position they had to fill, they got to fill in the last year. So that is slowing the pace of change, and numerous people responded in the survey saying, we're ready, we just need an opening, we need mobility in our staff so that we can address this. Where we can build, we did find a lot of indicators. Some we suspected, some came through more strongly than we suspected, on places we can build. In other words, where there are things happening that lead us to be encouraged and see some momentum in this. The divergence from legacy media is already dramatic in nonprofit news and community engagement and gender and other aspects. Diversification of staff, I'm talking in this sense, is not where it needs to be, but it is accelerating, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The motivation is internal, and we always know if somebody's trying to from externally make you do something, that isn't as strong as when the intent and the motivation is internal, and we are seeing that. And we do have some success stories to build on. We just included one slide on gender parity. This is a good news slide, so I'm afraid we are falling into the trap of journalists and focusing on where we need to build, and you could do a whole deck about this because it's really, really significant. As those of you know who've worked in this space, gender parity in media has actually moved, it's held at best flat. And in most parts of traditional media, it's moved backwards over the last 30 years. So the fact that half of nonprofit news executives, 60% of staffers, and 43% of boards are female is really an indication of how dramatically different this field is. I talked about that we see momentum, and one of the things that really excited us, again, comes from a small sample, but it's really interesting. News organizations founded in the last 3 years are more diverse from the get-go than startups before them. And so we are seeing that field shift. There's a lot of factors here, right? Nonprofit news came out of investigative reporting, which had been one of the less diverse parts of all of news media. And as we go, and many were founded by journalists coming out of that world. That's really been changing in recent years. It's a much more varied set of founders, younger staff. Younger staff are more coming from a more diverse demographic. So we are seeing that change. Across all INN members, the pace of change that we have seen in the last 5 years is really significant. The number of outlets serving communities of color or led by communities of color, those are two different measures, but overall those have increased like 6 times in 5 years. So the leadership is to about 20% of the field. And news nonprofits also come out of 2 fields, media, which isn't diverse, and philanthropy, which hasn't been diverse, and they run well ahead of philanthropy as well. these are what leaders of nonprofit newsrooms told us were the drivers of change. Executives and staff and board. The external factors, foundations, community leaders, really less so. So this is a good news, bad news. We would like to do more with communities, with foundations to support this as well, but it's a good sign that there is strong motivation internally. And we do see success stories. We see news organizations doing a lot more with community engagement, and there tends to be a correlation. It's not cause and effect, but we definitely see a clear correlation between community engagement and the diversity of staff. And that's a strong thread that we should keep following. We see a number of organizations like EdSource featured here changing its hiring processes, changing how it thinks about this, and talking about building broader networks from the leadership and from the staff to address staff diversity. We will come back, we'll talk about this a little later, but we will be doing case studies on more of these. We didn't have time to highlight more of them in this report, but we'll come back to that. There are a few more highlighted in the printed report. So I want to take a minute here in a sense of transparency and really accountability, because INN is the backbone organization for our field, and we want to tell you where we're at, not just where we think you should be at. And so I wanted to give you a quick overview of INN itself. INN, like the field, has grown a lot in the last few years. It came out of traditional media. Our staff was all white just a few years ago. It's now roughly 60-40 overall in our staffing. In our leadership, the board is 73% white, 27% BIPOC. This is, that's a changing metric, and we have actually today the most diverse slate of candidates to be elected as member representatives to the board that we have ever had by a long shot. And I really thank everyone for running and bringing that about. Executives and managers were about 60-30. We have a staffer who lives in both worlds as a person of color and white, and doesn't declare one or the other. Work to date, I'm not going to read all through these bullets. I will just sum it up. You know, in 2016, we started making this part of our work, but it was in the background. I would say last year in 2019, in our fall board meeting and looking at our budgeting for this year, the commitment to do this study, adding a new director level position to tackle this, I would say DEI moved from the background to the foreground. And then with what's happening this year, it's really moving from the foreground of our programming and some on our staffing to the front of all our efforts in a much more significant way, because we see how much more absolutely needs to be done. We're doing our own work internally. This has not been central to our organization. And so we have posted a value statement reflecting the board, reflecting the staff for the first time and the board. And we have a diversity report up for the first time. So we're absolutely working on this with you. We're going to switch gears here a little bit, and Sarah's going to walk through how we get from there to here, and how we move the ball forward given these stats. We feel good about some of where nonprofit news is at in terms of the change, but I think as long as we are seeing a situation in which 1 in 4 nonprofit news leaders feels its staff doesn't reflect the community, we can say we've broken from the systemic racism that's been in general media, but we're not out of it. We're not completely set apart. We have to tackle that, particularly given the mission of nonprofit news, that it serves communities that commercial media don't or won't, and the opportunity before us to rebuild this field in a way that's truly inclusive. One of the big moves we made last year was bringing on Sarah Shariari as in a new position as Director of Leadership and Talent Development. And Sarah spends more than 50% of her time on DEI issues. So we have a really concerted, intentional focus on it. And I am very happy to turn this over to Sarah, who can tell you about what we're doing now and what we're going to do ahead. Sarah?
Thanks, Sue. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to see you here. There's much work to be done. I'll say that from my point of view, every single thing that I do is diversity, equity, and inclusion. There is no moment, no program, no time that I'm not thinking about how we're building that into every aspect of what we do as an organization. So I'm going to start with what we have done in the past and what we're doing now, and then talk about what I want to do next year, given the information that we gained through the index, which, as you all know, it's wonderful when you're thinking about programming to have actual information to move off of and to build programs off of. So let's talk about internships first. In particular, paid, thoughtfully designed internships and fellowships. That's what we're interested in, paid, designed to advance people. They're a key piece in ensuring that outstanding emerging journalists from diverse backgrounds have a chance to get to know this field and potentially to join nonprofit news organizations. So we've focused on growing our internship partnerships and opportunities. Last year, that's 2019, we partnered to match about 25 interns with member newsrooms. This year, even as news outlets confronted the extreme uncertainty that came with COVID-19, we had more than 50 interns through INN partnerships in our members' newsrooms. More than 2/3 of those people were people of color, and they joined IN members remotely through our collaboration with groups including the Emma Bowen Foundation, which is absolutely amazing, the Missouri School of Journalism, the Dow Jones News Fund, and Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism, all of whom have been just wonderful partners. Right now, we're in the process of building additional internships and fellowships going into 2021, and I will be sending out information on those over the coming months. So please do keep an eye out for that. Alongside the internships, we really want to let people know that nonprofit news exists as a career possibility. And to that end, we go to career fairs and highlight jobs that are open with our members, especially career fairs that serve BIPOC journalists. This year, we attended NABJ, NAHJ, AAJA, and the Emma Bowen Foundation's career fairs. We had more than 40 one-on-one conversations with job seekers, and hundreds of people visited the INN jobs page over that time. We created a LinkedIn group where we share members' job postings. So that's for people specifically interested in careers of nonprofit news. It's a very diverse group. So members, please don't forget to submit your jobs to INN for free, because our pages really do attract this wonderful group of job seekers. So we center working with people of color at the internship, fellowship, and recruitment levels, but we also do it while supporting leaders and accelerating the success of new nonprofit news organizations, because we want to work at every level that our memberships are working at. So if you've been in leadership, many of you know that leadership can get lonely. Mid-level management can get lonely, leaving people to sort of reinvent the wheel again and again in your own organizations. The Emerging Leaders Program helps connect and support small cohorts of people who are really future industry leaders in nonprofit news. We reshaped it this year with a focus on one-on-one coaching around funding, strategic planning, and growth. And when we shape those groups, we're looking for a very diverse group of leaders. The Springboard program is our newest program. It's a small cohort that strengthens strategic planning and fundraising capabilities of leaders in brand new nonprofit news organizations. We just wrapped our first wonderful cohort. I would encourage you to read about them. They are an inspiration. And my goal is to grow both of these programs in the coming year, because I think that we must support people in leadership positions. We absolutely must. There's not a ton of it out there for people, and especially for people operating in the nonprofit space, particularly if you come from the editorial side, you're going to need some help there. Could we go to the next slide, Sue? Okay, so this is sort of a summary of what we have been doing: boosting collective recruitment, growing internships and fellowships, and focusing on leaders and entrepreneurs. Okay, now I want to pivot and I want to look forward at new plans and programs for the coming year. A lot of this is informed by what we learned in the index. And I think that what I'm about to talk about is key, because what value does an internship have or recruiting have if your newsroom is not an equitable and inclusive place for people of color? If we recruit people in and then it's not an equitable place for them, it's not a place where they can flourish, that recruiting is worse than us, like nothing, less than nothing. It's a false promise. It's completely wrong. And I couldn't continue this job unless I believed that we're working as hard as we can to create that inclusive and equitable space where people will be welcome and where they can flourish. So we need to be a place that lives up to our promise. And I'm going to talk about what we can do to work on that over the next year. So first, we're working to make best practice examples and guidelines around recruitment, and very, very importantly, around retention, available to all members. Because as we see in the index results, while the majority of our members do have hiring goals related to staff diversity, most do not have retention, promotion, or leadership development goals and plans. We need those goals and plans too. That has to be a part of growing people and retaining people in our work. And that is just a first step. Next, we'll support members in building DEI action plans for your organizations through several pathways: learning from subject matter experts, communities of practice, and peers. As we learned through the index, many organizations value diversity, equity, and inclusion, but very few have a written plan. To me, that's a big gap. It's a big gap between feeling that you value something and actually putting down the process, the goals, and the accountability that's going to lead to it happening. So this plan is going to focus on around several pillars: audiences, storytelling, partnerships, staff, leadership, and culture. And those plans are not going to be documents outlining vague ideas. They set goals and steps for how to reach them. They are active and they are oriented toward accountability. Finally, we're going to identify expert coaches who can support leaders and organizations working toward creating truly diverse, inclusive, and equitable news organizations. So those are the thoughts we're working on now. I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to work as hard as I can for you. And I look forward to hearing you as well as we go through this process. I'll say that I have personally experienced and seen many times how difficult and unwelcoming journalism can be for journalists of color. And I firmly believe that we have got to work every single day of our lives to change that. I'll end by saying that I believe racial inequity exists and persists in every aspect of journalism. But I also believe that we are here right now because we have the will to keep working to root it out. I think it's the most important work we can do in journalism today. So let's do it. Let's do it together. I'll just read this quote from INN Statements of Values. Let's work to build, support, and sustain journalism that accurately represents and values all people, particularly those whose work has historically been marginalized and underrepresented. So thank you. And I know Sue and I look forward to hearing your questions and your thoughts.
Hi, everybody. We have the deck will be available after, and the report is available as well, but we'd really look forward to your questions and your comments and the conversation about this. I'm going to throw one out to everybody in chat. Are we focused on the right things? Are there other things in here that you see in your world where INN can help you address this issue, or INN itself can do more to advance inclusion in this field? We had a question from someone: do we link to our values statement? Our values statement is right on our about page that is on inn.org. Someone I'm sure will put up, oh, Shireen put up a link to it. Thanks, Shireen. It's in that core page, right, with our vision, our mission, and then our values statement. We're about to redesign the website, and so it may get its own page in that. We also are talking to a number of members about how to make stronger value pages in general around DEI, around your other journalistic values, around your values as a nonprofit. So we will have some added resources on that coming toward the end of the year.
And I'll say that, working on that statement of values together as a team was so important for all of us. I think Sue did a great job making time during the workday for us to do this. This work is not something that people of color on the staff have to do after hours. It was everybody. It was during work time. We did it together. And that was really an experience for all of us. We are a dispersed team. We've never really met a lot of each other, one another. So that was just it was hard. It was stressful. There was some crying, probably for me, because I cry a lot when I talk about things that matter to me. But it was also just key for us to do it together. And I think we're all so glad that we did it.
Jonathan posted a question about a couple other places to get data. As I said, we ended up doing this because there isn't a lot of great data about nonprofit news, but I would encourage, there's a couple other things I would just mention and encourage people to look at. Pew Research is doing many studies, and so is Knight Foundation, about not surveys of journalists, surveys about what people think about journalism, how they're finding it, about the polarization. And those are worth subscribing to and reading to get out of our journalism head and see how polarized communities can be and how polarized their news sources are. Because I think that's something that for us is, if none of us are reading the same news and it is that fragmented, these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion just go much deeper. So those are a couple of places I would encourage people to look. Many of you were here when we opened with Farai Chidea today. Farai has her own website, and she's been one of the great writers on this topic for years. And some of her pieces, there's one called The Patriotism of Love. Let's consider the patriotism of love versus hate. And it's that may not sound like a title about journalism, but it is, and it's wonderful. And I would really encourage you to, that's another place. It's not data, but it's reading on these issues that can really be impactful.
Hey, Sarah,
we have some, go ahead.
Sarah, thank you. Well, both of you. I mean, I think this has just been really a great day so far, and really wonderful to really focus on the equity question, like just have your head really deeply there, right? And really thinking. I was just going to add that I feel like probably INN could really help with putting together, like, the best readings, the lists for, even all the job things. Like I realized today, I think it was, I'm already forgetting, some of the lists, like we think we're posting everywhere. We think we're doing everything, right? But we're all like searching around to have all the best resources to go to, the best groups and organizations, et cetera, et cetera. So, I just think that we can really help by putting some of those lists together, even like the college journalism sites and, the career people at all the universities, we're all like doing this on our own, and it seems a little crazy to do it that way. So there's just a lot of opportunity for reaching the right people as a starting point. And then I would love to definitely get some good guidance around what really makes an excellent retention program, right? Because we are, we're looking at everything and, trying to all newsrooms across America, I think right now. But I think there is, really having the wisdom, right, to come up with the right kind of plans that really work and are important and helpful and professional development paths, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. I really do see one of my roles as gathering resources and readings that are going to help people, make the plans you need to make in your own shops, in your own spaces. And I will definitely be looking at that. We have a question here. Tom says, I found an extremely low rate of BIPOC men in newsrooms. Is there something we're doing about that? You know, that's a good question. We didn't particularly look at gender here, but that's something I will look at and probably do some outreach directly to some colleges and universities on that front. We have some other questions. Shireen says, are people working to diversify their professional networks, not just when they're hiring? That's something we heard in this survey. You know, how you spread the word matters. Yes, I mean, fundamental. You have to have a diverse professional network. Like, you've got to go out and make that happen. So Regina says, bringing an intern on isn't necessarily possible for leanly staffed nonprofits. Editors may not have the time to provide the training an intern needs. Yes, time is absolutely a challenge for a lot of people. But I think, you know, I've worked with so many students, sort of once you get the program together, it's much easier to get it going forward. So if you needed help working to support a student in a meaningful way, that's something that we could probably work with you to do. I think that once a year, you know, you probably don't want to have 3 interns 3 times a year, but once a year, it's probably possible to get it together to work closely with an intern. And a lot of the organizations that we work help offset the cost of paying the intern to make it more financially accessible. Okay. It's more than just lists. Think about your job descriptions for these positions. This is Lisa Gardner, Springer from PRX. What might be barriers or obstacles as you think about the qualifications you seek? Absolutely. And Lisa, that's one of the things that we're going to look at when we talk about putting together job descriptions. Are you in your job description excluding people without being cognizant of it? And who's working on writing those job descriptions? Who's on your hiring committees? How are you going about that? Julie says Current did a series of webinars this summer on the imperative of inclusion. That link is there, so you can check it out. Sorry, I'm running back here through questions.
Okay. Sarah, I can take Marcia's question, which was when we know she was asking on that funder question, the fact that funders didn't rise is really a very significant factor in advancing diversity, and what can INN do to get in front of them to talk about that. That is very real and on our radar. I think there are several things that can be done, and many funders, I'd say, would, you know, have an intent around this and a renewed intent around it this year that we can act on. So even taking things, there is the Racial Equity Fund at Borealis. There are other pooled funds through Newsmatch. We're looking at some elements of pooled matches that help in this field. But let me step back more generally with journalism funders. I think there are things we can do. And that is, some of them are just asking about diversity. If we ask about your editorial quality and your donors and your community, we can ask, and that includes INN, we'll be asking in our program applications and so forth, just saying, where are you at? It doesn't, that may not be a qualifier or disqualifier, but it's constantly keeping it there and making sure we're addressing it as an element of what it really is, which is editorial credibility and quality. So I think we can work with funders to do that and to bring more attention to it. There's another area that I think we can work with funders, and that we have found ourselves doing this to some extent. We, like many nonprofits, you're working with many partners, consultants, partners, and we work to make sure that when you're working with vendors or partners, that broadens this network. And so are you working with a broad selection? Often funders will suggest you work with somebody that's part of their network, and those may have been in the very much the traditional and mostly white mainstream media landscape. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to say, no, you know, we really want to broaden this network, and here's another resource that you may not know, but we've heard about, and pull that into it. And I think I'd love to see foundations broaden the pool of recommended resources as well. Switching back to the questions here. Westview Media noted college journalism departments can help you with that intern training, the resource issue. That's a really nice suggestion.
Absolutely.
There. And inclusion surveys at member organizations. That was a question from Lori Hearn at iNewsSource. Yes, I think there are a couple of things we can do around that. We just came up with a grid if you are tracking the diversity within your organization and your board, and we will share that. We're using it ourselves. It isn't perfect. These things are evolving, but we can share that for any member. That isn't so much a survey. We can look at that. We also are very interested, until we had this survey on DEI, we didn't really have the basis to do broad source audits and content audits and look at how they correlate. So, you know, if you take just gender parity, are women quoted more often in organizations that have gender parity? Do you have more equitable sourcing and coverage? And the same with race and ethnicity. So this gives us a baseline that either we or partners or researchers outside of INN can now use to delve deeper.
And I think Laurie's point that Laurie says it's extremely important to understand how the staff feels about where they work and its culture before you can set goals and action items. I completely agree. It's a long process. I mean, the first thing we had to do internally was actually get to know each other a little bit before we could even begin to set these goals and act. It is most certainly a process. Matt, yes, we will be looking at and identifying some coaches as well. And I will just say at this point that I really want to hear from you. So if you think, wow, there's something here that, you know, is really speaking to me, or wow, Sarah is so far off base that I have to send her this message right now so she knows what we really need, send me a message, send me an email. I'm dropping my email into the chat now. So please do feel free. I love to talk and hear what you're working on and what you need.
And to answer Matt from Yes Magazine, yes, Sarah has been actually taking a lot of time to interview DEI coaches and resources, and we will find some recommended providers. We've had a lot of requests for that, and there are many people working in it, but understanding this entrepreneurial culture as well, and bringing some of the interesting things that Sarah has conveyed as some of the most intriguing coaches in terms of really getting it come from entirely outside news. And so that may be an opportunity to look more broadly and bring resources into the field.
I wonder if, you know, I was thinking maybe some of our people on the phone on this now are already experiencing this, but you know, it's already getting hard to get training because everybody's like piling up with training dates. I mean, I'm finding that as I'm reaching out to people. I wonder if we couldn't work with some of the, you know, some of the best people to do, you know, our own series for our members, you know, small newsrooms, I don't know, vertical newsrooms, whatever, like, you know, little groups that people could join over time and get that high quality training. And also that they're going to learn a lot from the perspectives of our members, right? So that, I think there's a lot of value in that versus like every newsroom trying to have their own, you know, training for this and that, and, you know, 4 or 5 different sessions. So just a thought.
I think that's a really interesting thought. I think that, you know, some things need to be done with the specific news organization for it to be really meaningful to that organization. But you're speaking to something. Fran and I talked with a coach last week who talked a lot about communities of practice where people learn and work together. And we just absolutely fell in love with that concept. So I think that idea of people working together to advance, members working together in groups is a great thought. I think we're coming right up against the end of our time.
Yeah. I want to conclude by saying a huge thank you to the members who completed that study. It's not a 5-minute study. It goes deep. And we could tell from the responses, many people wrote notes. People were frank. They were honest about where they are and where they aren't. They were very, very blunt about it. And the 117 organizations who really took the time to invest and do that have given all of us something to build on and measure our progress from. And we'll repeat this periodically, but a huge shout out. That's a lot of investment of time and care, and caring about your other members because you are investing time that benefits other people. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.